Francesco Crispi, the first Albanian Prime Minister of Italy, and his legacy. Francesco Crispi, October 4, 1818 to August 11, 1901, was an Italian patriot, statesman, and one of the most prominent figures of the Risorgimento. Of Arborish descent, he was a close associate of Giuseppe Mazzini and Giuseppe Garibaldi, and played a decisive role in the unification of Italy in 1860. Crispi served as Prime Minister of Italy from 1887 to 1891, and again from 1893 to 1896, becoming the first head of government from southern Italy. At the height of his influence, he was considered an international statesman of great stature, frequently mentioned alongside leaders such as Otto von Bismarck, William Ewart Gladstone, and Lord Salisbury. Initially a liberal Democrat inspired by Republican ideals, Crispi gradually transformed into an authoritarian leader during his later premiership, cultivating close ties with Bismarck and promoting an aggressive foreign policy, particularly against France. His career, however, ended in controversy. He was implicated in a major banking scandal and forced to resign after Italy's humiliating defeat at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, which shattered its colonial ambitions in Ethiopia. Due to his authoritarian style of governance, Crispi is often described as a forerunner to Benito Mussolini and an early precursor of Italian fascism. Francesco Crispi's paternal family originated from the small agricultural town of Palazzo Adriano in southwestern Sicily, a community founded in the late 15th century by Orthodox Christian Albanians, Arborish, who had fled their homeland following the Ottoman conquest of Albania. His grandfather was an Arborish Orthodox priest, married clergy being customary within their tradition, and Arborish remained the family language well into Crispi's youth. Crispi himself was born in Ribera, Sicily, to Tommaso Crispi, a grain merchant, and Giuseppa Genova. He was baptized into the Greek Catholic Rite, in keeping with his Arborish heritage. Belonging to an Albanian origin family, Crispi grew up in a multilingual environment and reportedly spoke Italian only as his third or fourth language, after Arborish, a variant of Albanian, Greek, and likely Sicilian. His uncle, Giuseppe Crispi, was a prominent intellectual who authored the first monograph on the Albanian language. Crispi cultivated a strong sense of identity tied to both his Greek and Albanian roots. In his diary of 1859, he described himself as Greek through his mixed Greek-Albanian ancestry. More explicitly, in 1885, in the context of the Albanian question, he declared, "I am Albanian by blood and heart, an Italo-Albanian from Sicily." At the age of 5, Crispi was sent to live with relatives in Villafranca to pursue his education. In 1829, at just 11 years old, he entered the seminary in Palermo, where he studied classical subjects under the guidance of his uncle Giuseppe Crispi, then rector of the institution. He remained there until 1834 or 1835, when his father, by then mayor of Ribera, faced serious health and financial difficulties. During this period, Crispi befriended the poet and physician Vincenzo Navarro, whose influence introduced him to the ideals of Romanticism. In 1835, he enrolled at the University of Palermo to study law and literature, earning his degree in 1837. That same year, despite his father's opposition, he married Rosina D'Angelo, the daughter of a goldsmith, who was already expecting their first child. Their daughter Giuseppa was born in May 1837, named after Crispi's grandmother. The marriage was tragically short-lived. Rosina died in July 1839, shortly after giving birth to a son who also passed away, and by the end of that year, little Giuseppa had also died. Between 1838 and 1839, Crispi founded his own newspaper, L'Oredo, named after the Sicilian river Oredo. Through this venture, he came into contact with influential political figures, including the Neapolitan liberal activist and poet Carlo Porio. His writings during this time reflected both his radicalism and his Albanian-inspired passion for liberty. He argued for the education of the poor, denounced the excessive wealth of the Catholic Church, and championed legal equality for all citizens, including women. In 1845, Crispi was appointed judge in Naples, where he quickly gained recognition for his liberal and revolutionary ideals, marking the beginning of his ascent as one of the most important Italian statesmen of Albanian origin. On December 20th, 1847, Francesco Crispi, of Arborish Albanian descent, was sent to Palermo together with the diplomat and patriot Salvatore Castiglia to help organize a revolutionary uprising against the Bourbon monarchy of King Ferdinand II of the Two Sicilies. The revolution broke out on January 12, 1848, making Sicily the first stage of the wave of European revolutions that erupted that year. It was not the island's first revolt against Bourbon rule, but it was the most ambitious, deliberately timed by Crispi and his fellow revolutionaries to coincide with the king's birthday. The uprising was popular in character, with posters and notices circulated days in advance of the actual outbreak, and it quickly spread throughout Palermo. The Sicilian nobility re-established the liberal constitution of 1812, which emphasized representative democracy and parliamentary government. Vincenzo Fardella was elected president of the newly revived Sicilian parliament, and ideas for an Italian confederation of states were actively discussed. Crispi, appointed to the Provisional Sicilian Parliament and entrusted with the Defense Committee, openly supported separatism, seeking to sever all ties with Naples. For 16 months, Sicily functioned as a quasi-independent state under the leadership of Ruggero Settimo, before being crushed by Bourbon forces on May 15, 1849. Settimo fled to Malta, while Crispi, denied amnesty, was forced into exile. After leaving Sicily, Crispi sought refuge in Marseille, where he met Rose Montmaison, who would become his second wife. In 1849, he relocated to Turin, capital of the Kingdom of Sardinia, working as a journalist and strengthening ties with Giuseppe Mazzini, the Republican leader and key figure of the Italian national movement. In 1853, Crispi was implicated in a Mazzinian conspiracy, arrested by the Piedmontese police, and exiled to Malta. There, on December 27, 1854, he married Montmaison. He subsequently moved to London, where he became an active revolutionary conspirator in exile politics, maintaining his close friendship with Mazzini and gradually shifting away from Sicilian separatism toward the broader cause of Italian unification. In January 1856, he relocated to Paris to continue his work as a journalist. That same year, he learned of the death of his father and belatedly of his mother, who had passed away 3 years earlier. On January 14, 1858, the Italian revolutionary Felice Orsini and accomplices attempted to assassinate Emperor Napoleon III of France in Paris by throwing bombs at the imperial carriage outside the theater on Rue Le Pelletier. Although the emperor and empress escaped unharmed, 8 people were killed and 142 injured. Orsini was arrested, tried, and executed. In later years, unsubstantiated rumors suggested that Crispi may have had some indirect contact with Orsini before the attack, but no evidence ever supported such claims. Nevertheless, on August 7, 1858, Crispi was expelled from France, forcing him once again into political exile. In Sicily, with Garibaldi. In June 1859, Francesco Crispi, of Arborish Albanian descent, returned to Italy after publicly repudiating the growing dominance of Piedmont in the unification process. Reaffirming his Republican convictions and his commitment to national unity, he operated clandestinely, traveling under disguises and false passports. That year, he toured Sicily twice in secrecy, laying the groundwork for the revolutionary uprising of 1860. He also briefly visited Greece in October 1859, a journey that further strengthened his ideological links with his Albanian Greek heritage and his Phil-Hellenic sympathies. Crispi played a decisive role in persuading Giuseppe Garibaldi to launch the legendary Expedition of the Thousand, a daring mission in which just over 1,000 volunteers set sail to liberate Sicily from Bourbon rule. On May 11, 1860, Garibaldi and his men landed at Marsala, beginning a campaign against a kingdom that possessed both a larger standing army and a stronger navy. Against all odds, the expedition succeeded. A plebiscite soon followed, formally uniting Naples and Sicily with the Kingdom of Sardinia, paving the way for the proclamation of the Kingdom of Italy on March 17, 1861. This maritime campaign was the only joint initiative ever agreed upon by the 4 principal architects of Italian unification: Giuseppe Mazzini, Giuseppe Garibaldi, King Victor Emmanuel II, and Camillo Cavour, each of whom pursued different political aims. Crispi, using his influence, was instrumental in aligning the operation with a broader vision of national unity, demonstrating his ability to bridge the gap between Republican ideals and pragmatic state-building. The motivations of those who joined the expedition varied considerably. For Garibaldi, it was the realization of a united Italy. For the Sicilian bourgeoisie, it promised a measure of local autonomy within the new kingdom. And for the rural masses, it offered hope of land redistribution and liberation from centuries of oppression. Crispi's political leadership and organizational skills were essential in uniting these diverse aspirations under the banner of Italian unification. Garibaldi's dictatorship. Following the fall of Palermo in 1860, Francesco Crispi, of Arborish Albanian origin, was appointed first Secretary of State in Garibaldi's provisional government. Almost immediately, a conflict emerged between Garibaldi's administration and the emissaries of Count Cavour over the question of Sicily's annexation to the Kingdom of Sardinia. Under Garibaldi's direction, the dictatorial government of Sicily established both an army and a fleet, asserting its independence in the interim phase of liberation. The rapid pace of Garibaldi's victories alarmed Cavour, who, in early July, pressed the provisional government to accept immediate annexation. Garibaldi, however, refused to concede until the war had been concluded. Cavour's envoy, Giuseppe La Farina, was arrested and expelled from the island, replaced by Agostino de Pretis, considered more conciliatory, who eventually won Garibaldi's confidence and was appointed pro-dictator. Crispi, fiercely opposed to Cavour's influence, maneuvered successfully to secure de Pretis's resignation, consolidating his own authority within the Sicilian administration. His opposition to Cavour remained constant, reflecting his republican and revolutionary convictions. In Naples, the situation was markedly different. Garibaldi's provisional government there came increasingly under the sway of Cavour's supporters. Arriving in mid-September, Crispi attempted to expand his influence at the expense of Cavour's loyalists, but his efforts faltered as the revolutionary momentum of the expedition of the Thousand began to dissipate, particularly after the indecisive Battle of Vulturnus. On October 3, 1860, in an effort to strengthen ties with King Victor Emmanuel II, Garibaldi appointed Giorgio Pallavicino, a staunch supporter of the House of Savoy, as pro-dictator of Naples. Pallavicino quickly declared Crispi unfit to continue serving as Secretary of State. Meanwhile, Cavour asserted that southern Italy would accept nothing less than unconditional annexation to the Kingdom of Sardinia, to be ratified through a plebiscite. Crispi, still committed to extending the revolution to liberate Rome and Venice, opposed this approach. He instead advocated for the election of a parliamentary assembly to decide the fate of the South, an idea also supported by the Federalist Carlo Cattaneo. Ultimately, Garibaldi left the decision to the two pro-dictators, Antonio Mordini in Sicily and Giorgio Pallavicino in Naples, both of whom endorsed the plebiscite. On October 13, 1860, disillusioned and outmaneuvered, Crispi resigned from Garibaldi's government, marking the end of his formal role in the dictatorship while preserving his reputation as one of the most ardent defenders of revolutionary principles within the Risorgimento. Member of Parliament. The first general elections for the new Italian Parliament were held on January 27, 1861, even before the official proclamation of the Kingdom of Italy on March 17th of that year. Francesco Crispi, an Arborish Albanian by origin, was elected as a deputy of the historical left in the constituency of Castelvetrano, a seat he would successfully defend in every legislature until the end of his life. In Parliament, Crispi quickly established a reputation as one of the most aggressive and uncompromising voices of the left. His speeches were fiery and often confrontational, earning him notoriety for denouncing the right as guilty of diplomatizing the revolution, transforming the sacrifices of the Risorgimento into cautious compromises. His strong personality, coupled with his personal ambition and restlessness, made him a difficult ally, and he soon acquired the nickname Il Solitario, the Loner. By 1864, Crispi made a decisive ideological shift. Breaking with his old mentor Giuseppe Mazzini, he declared his support for the monarchy, arguing in a letter, "The monarchy unites us, the Republic would divide us. This marked the beginning of his gradual transformation from radical revolutionary to a pragmatic, and at times authoritarian, statesman. Though he refused to join Baron Bettino Ricasoli's cabinet in 1866, Crispi remained deeply involved in shaping national politics. In 1867, he actively opposed Garibaldi's planned invasion of the Papal States, foreseeing the inevitable French intervention that culminated in the disaster at Mentana. His political methods could be as sharp as his rhetoric. In the so-called Labio affair, he stirred a fierce campaign against conservative deputies, accusing them, on often tenuous grounds, of corruption. During the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71, Crispi campaigned energetically to block any Italian alliance with France, and instead pressured Giovanni Lanza's cabinet to seize the historic opportunity to march on Rome, bringing the Eternal City into the Italian state. After the death of Urbano Rattazzi in 1873, Crispi supporters sought to elevate him as leader of the parliamentary left. However, aware of the need to maintain the confidence of the monarchy, Crispi deliberately withdrew his candidacy and promoted the election of Agostino de Pretis, thereby consolidating his position as one of the most influential yet unpredictable figures of the historical left. President of the Chamber of Deputies. Following the general election of 1876, in which the left secured nearly 70% of the vote, Francesco Crispi was elected president of the Chamber of Deputies. 33. In the autumn of 1877, he undertook a confidential diplomatic mission to London, Paris, and Berlin in his capacity as president of the chamber. During this mission, he established cordial personal relationships with leading statesmen, including British Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone, Foreign Minister Lord Granville, and German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. 34. Amid the unfolding Great Eastern Crisis, Bismarck and the British Foreign Secretary, the Earl of Derby, suggested Albania as a possible territorial compensation for Italy should Austria-Hungary annex Bosnia. Crispi, however, declined this proposition, expressing instead a preference for the Italian Alpine regions that remained under Austro-Hungarian control. Minister of the Interior. In December 1877, Francesco Crispi succeeded Giovanni Nicotera as Minister of the Interior in the cabinet of Agostino de Pretis. Although his tenure lasted only 70 days, it proved instrumental in consolidating the foundations of the unitary monarchy. During this period, Crispi also sought to reconcile the numerous factions within the left, which at the time remained fragmented. The death of King Victor Emmanuel II on January 9, 1878, and the accession of his successor, Umberto I, provided Crispi with the opportunity to secure the formal recognition of the unitary monarchy. The new king adopted the title Umberto I of Italy rather than Umberto IV of Savoy, thereby symbolizing the primacy of the nation over dynastic tradition. Only a few weeks later, on February 7, 1878, the death of Pope Pius IX necessitated a conclave, the first to be held since the unification of Italy. With the support of Pasquale Stanislao Mancini and Cardinal Gioacchino Pecci, later Pope Leo XIII, Crispi successfully persuaded the Sacred College to hold the conclave in Rome, thereby reinforcing the legitimacy of the new capital. Bigamy scandal and political isolation. Despite these achievements, Crispi's statesmanship was overshadowed by a personal scandal. Accused of bigamy, he was forced to defend his private life before both public opinion and the courts. The controversy stemmed from his remarriage, while a woman he had married in 1853 was still alive. A subsequent ruling, however, determined that the Maltese marriage of 1853 was invalid, as it had been contracted while an earlier spouse was still living. By the time of his third marriage, his first wife had passed away, and the second marriage was deemed legally void. Thus, his latest marriage was upheld as valid and not bigamous. Nevertheless, the political fallout was severe. Under mounting pressure, Crispi was compelled to resign in March 1878 after only 3 months in office, an event that brought down the entire government. For the following 9 years, Crispi lived under a political cloud, leading the progressive opposition. In 1881, he emerged as one of the principal advocates of universal male suffrage, which was eventually adopted under the government of De Pretis. The Pentarchy. In 1883, A new political phase emerged with the alliance between Agostino de Pretis, leader of the left, and Marco Minghetti, leader of the right. This flexible centrist arrangement, designed to marginalize political extremes, became known as Trasformismo. Crispi, a staunch supporter of a two-party system, strongly opposed this approach and instead founded a progressive and radical parliamentary faction known as the Dissident Left. This group, soon dubbed the Pentarchy due to its 5 principal leaders, Giuseppe Zanardelli, Benedetto Caroli, Giovanni Nicotera, Agostino Magliani, Alfredo Beccarini, and Crispi himself, advocated for a blend of authoritarian and progressive domestic policies, expansionist ambitions, Germanophile foreign relations, and a protectionist economic program. In the general elections of May 1886, the dissident left secured nearly 20% of the vote, enabling Crispi to return to office as Minister of the Interior in the de Pretis cabinet. Following de Pretis' death on July 29, 1887, Crispi abandoned the dissident left, assumed leadership of the broader left, and was appointed by the king as both Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs. First term as Prime Minister. On July 29, 1887, Francesco Crispi was sworn in as Prime Minister, becoming the first statesman from southern Italy to hold the office. His appointment marked a turning point in Italian politics. While initially hailed as a reformist leader, his assertive and often uncompromising political style quickly drew accusations from opponents who branded him an authoritarian strongman. Reform agenda. True to his progressive leanings, Crispi advanced a wide-ranging program of reforms. His government abolished the death penalty, repealed anti-strike legislation, limited police powers, restructured the penal code and judicial administration with the assistance of justice. Minister Giuseppe Zanardelli reorganized charitable institutions, introduced public health measures, and enacted protections for Italian immigrants working abroad. At the same time, Crispi sought to strengthen national identity and state authority, combining domestic reform with ambitions for Italy's expansion on the international stage. Administrative and legislative reforms. One of his most significant initiatives concerned the reform of the state's central administration. This measure enhanced the powers of the Prime Minister by separating governmental responsibilities from parliamentary maneuvering, thereby shielding the executive from partisan gamesmanship. It granted the cabinet authority to determine the number and functions of ministries, while preserving the king's constitutional prerogative to organize them under the Albertine Statute. The law also established the role of ministerial secretaries, tasked with assisting ministers and representing them in Parliament. Despite criticism from both the right and the far left, the reform was approved by the Chamber of Deputies on December 9, 1887. In 1888 to 1889, Crispi introduced additional landmark reforms. A reorganization of the magistracy and the promulgation of a unified penal code, widely known as the Zanardelli Code, modernized Italian law. This code abolished capital punishment, recognized the right to strike, and was lauded across Europe as a model of progressive legal thought. At the local level, Crispi pursued reforms that reshaped municipal government. Approved in July 1888 and enacted the following year, the law nearly doubled the local electorate by expanding suffrage. It also democratized the selection of mayors, who, in municipalities with more than 10,000 inhabitants and in all provincial capitals, would henceforth be elected rather than appointed by the central government. The legislation further introduced the office of the prefect, reinforcing the link between local and national administration. Public health and secular policy. Responding to the devastating cholera epidemic of 1884 to 1885, which claimed tens of thousands of lives and struck Naples with particular ferocity, Crispi enacted the first Italian law establishing a national healthcare system. This legislation also sanctioned cremation as a hygienic practice, reflecting both scientific progress and Crispi's Masonic and secular principles. For the first time, the state assumed responsibility in areas of charity and social welfare that had long been dominated by private benefactors and, above all, by the Roman Catholic Church. This direct challenge to ecclesiastical influence provoked fierce opposition, but underscored Crispi's vision of a modern, secular, and centralized Italian state. Foreign policy as prime minister in the late 1880s and early 1890s. Francesco Crispi pursued an assertive foreign policy aimed at strengthening Italy's fragile institutions and elevating its standing among the European powers. He viewed France as Italy's permanent rival and sought to counterbalance French influence by cultivating close relations with Britain. However, Britain's reluctance to antagonize France left Crispi disillusioned about what he had believed to be a privileged Anglo-Italian friendship. This disappointment pushed him further toward imperial ambitions in Africa, particularly in Ethiopia and the Ottoman province of Tripolitania, modern-day Libya. Relations with Germany. One of Crispi's first acts as premier was a visit to German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck to discuss the functioning of the Triple Alliance. Anchoring his foreign policy on that alliance, supplemented by Italy's naval entente with Great Britain, Crispi adopted a confrontational stance toward France. He broke off negotiations for a new Franco-Italian commercial treaty and declined France's invitation to participate in the Paris exhibition of 1889. The Triple Alliance, however, committed Italy to the prospect of war with France and necessitated substantial military expenditure, which was deeply unpopular at home. In 1888, Crispi escalated tensions further by initiating a tariff war with France. The resulting Franco-Italian trade war proved disastrous, costing Italy billions of lire in lost exports over a decade and only ending in 1898, when both sides agreed to lift their tariffs. Colonial policy. A staunch nationalist, Crispi was determined to transform Italy into a colonial power, often bringing the country into conflict with France, which opposed Italian expansion in Africa and had already thwarted Italy's ambitions in Tunisia. Under Crispi's leadership, Italy signed the Treaty of Wuchal in 1889 with King Menelik II of Shua, later Emperor of Ethiopia. The treaty recognized Italian control over the territories of Bogos, Hamazian, Akili Guzri, and Siri, forming the basis of the colony of Eritrea, in exchange for financial aid and military supplies to Ethiopia. However, divergent interpretations of the treaty would later lead to diplomatic rupture and armed conflict. The Albanian question. Crispi, himself of Arborish Italo-Albanian origin, displayed a particular interest in Balkan affairs. As early as 1859, he had argued that a Greco-Albanian union would strengthen ties between Italy and Greece. Later, as prime minister, he considered Albania's autonomy or independence within the Ottoman framework as a strategic safeguard against both pan-Slavism and Austro-Hungarian expansion. To counter Vienna's growing influence in northern Albania, Crispi fostered closer ethno-cultural ties between Italy's Arborish communities and the Albanians of the Balkans. He supported the opening of the first Italian schools in Shkodër in 1888 and maintained correspondence with prominent figures of the Albanian national awakening, including Abdul Frashëri and Femi Mitko. These initiatives, however, raised Austrian suspicions of Italy's expanding influence in the region. The Cerruti Affair. Crispi's assertive foreign posture also extended to Latin America. In 1888, a dispute between Italian entrepreneur Ernesto Cerruti and Colombian President Rafael Núñez escalated to the point where Italy dispatched a small naval squadron, prompting fears of imminent intervention along the Colombian coast. Ultimately, faced with international pressure and the threat of military action, Colombia agreed to submit the matter to arbitration. In 1891, Pope Leo XIII mediated the conflict, resulting in an agreement under which Colombia compensated Cerruti, though at a lower amount than originally demanded by Italy. Resignation. The general election of 1890 brought Crispi a sweeping parliamentary majority, with 405 of 508 deputies supporting his government. Yet his dominance proved short-lived. A major crisis erupted when Emperor Menelik II of Ethiopia repudiated the Italian version of the Treaty of Wuchal, denying that it placed Ethiopia under Italian protection. The controversy, widely reported in the foreign press, damaged Crispi's credibility. His government was further undermined when Finance Minister Giovanni Giolitti, his chief rival, resigned. The situation worsened when Giolitti's successor, Bernardino Grimaldi, revealed that the national deficit was far higher than Crispi had acknowledged. In February 1891, after losing a parliamentary vote of confidence, Crispi resigned as prime minister. After the premiership, following Crispi's resignation, King Umberto I appointed the Marquis Antonio Starabba di Rudini to form a new cabinet, though his government quickly faltered. In 1892, Giovanni Giolitti, emerging as the new leader of the left, replaced Di Rudini as prime minister. Yet Giolitti's administration rested on a fragile majority, and by the end of 1892, he became embroiled in a major scandal, once again reshaping the balance of Italian politics. Banca Romana scandal. The Banca Romana scandal erupted in January 1893, centering on the collapse of one of Italy's 6 national banks, authorized to issue currency. The bank had extended substantial loans to property developers, but was left with enormous liabilities following the real estate market collapse of 1887. Efforts to suppress public awareness of the crisis further fueled public distrust. While King Umberto I was implicated in aspects of the affair, Crispi's reputation emerged largely unscathed, positioning him as a formidable political force capable of challenging both Giolitti's government and the monarchy itself. Attempts by Giolitti and his allies to collect compromising material against Crispi proved ineffective, as judicial inquiries did not implicate him in wrongdoing. Return to power and second term. By December 1893, widespread unrest in Sicily, coupled with the fallout from the Banca Romana scandal, created a strong demand for Crispi's return to power. On December 15th, he formed a new government, succeeding Giolitti, whose moderate measures had failed to contain escalating disorder. Fasci Siciliani. Crispi's second term coincided with the rise of the Fasci Siciliani, a popular movement of democratic and socialist inspiration that mobilized Sicily's poorest and most exploited classes between 1889 and 1894. The movement advocated for improved rights and reforms, including adjustments to sharecropping and rental agreements. When landowners rejected these demands, widespread strikes erupted, escalating into violent confrontations that threatened public order. Giolitti's mild response had been ineffective, resulting in his resignation in late November 1893. By December, clashes had led to 92 deaths in Sicily, alongside the destruction of government buildings and businesses. In response, Crispi declared a state of siege on January 3, 1894, deploying 40,000 troops under General Roberto Mora di Lavriano. The unrest was suppressed through decisive military action, including summary executions. Repression extended beyond movement leaders to peasants, students, professionals, and sympathizers, often without sufficient evidence, effectively crushing the Fasci Siciliani by mid-1894. Financial crisis and assassination attempt. Crispi supported the stringent fiscal measures introduced by his Minister of Finance, Sidney Sonnino, to stabilize Italian credit following the financial crisis of 1892 to 1893. Sonnino's policies were controversial, prompting his resignation on June 4, 1894, immediately followed by Crispi's brief resignation. The king, however, reinstated him to form a new cabinet. On June 16, 1894, anarchist Paolo Liga attempted to assassinate Crispi, although the attempt failed. The assassination of French President Sadi Carnot 8 days later heightened the climate of fear, enabling Crispi to introduce robust anti-anarchist legislation in July 1894. These laws imposed severe penalties for incitement, extended police powers of preventive arrest and deportation, and were also used against socialist groups. Parliament largely endorsed these measures, consolidating Crispi's authority and contributing to Italy's gradual economic stabilization. Political opposition and parliamentary challenges. Despite his strengthened position, Crispi faced ongoing political attacks. His longtime rival Giovanni Giolitti attempted to undermine him by presenting old documents alleging financial improprieties connected to the Banca Romana scandal. Additionally, radical leader Felice Cavallotti criticized Crispi's uncompromising repression of disorder, his commitment to the Triple Alliance, and the retention of Eritrea as a colony, campaigning to investigate his relations with the bank. On December 15, 1894, a parliamentary commission published its report, sparking unrest within the chamber. In response, Crispi submitted a decree to the king dissolving parliament. On January 13, 1895, Umberto I acted on the decree, and Giolitti, facing trial for the bank scandal, relocated to Berlin. Despite continued attacks from Giolitti and Cavallotti, Crispi's authority remained firm. The general election of 1895 confirmed his dominance, with his government securing 334 out of 508 seats. Preferring decisive action over parliamentary debate, Crispi increasingly governed through royal decree, prompting criticism of his authoritarian tendencies, even amid a commanding legislative majority. Italo-Ethiopian War and Resignation. During his second term, Francesco Crispi pursued an assertive expansionist policy in East Africa. King Umberto I famously remarked, "Crispi wants to occupy everywhere, even China and Japan, while also acknowledging his pragmatism. Crispi is a pig, but a necessary pig," indicating that despite his controversial methods, he was indispensable for the national interest. Crispi adopted a highly belligerent foreign policy stance, openly discussing the possibility of war against France, dispatching a naval squadron to the eastern Mediterranean to prepare for conflict with the Ottoman Empire over Albania, planning an expeditionary force to seize a city in China, and proposing intervention in South Africa to mediate disputes between Great Britain and the Transvaal Republic. He also sought to reinterpret the Triple Alliance, viewing it as a framework for offensive action rather than a means to preserve peace in Europe. The defining event of Crispi's foreign policy was the First Italo-Ethiopian War, arising from a contested treaty that Italy claimed established Ethiopia as an Italian protectorate. Contrary to Italian expectations, Ethiopian Emperor Menelik II consolidated support from former rivals, presenting a united front. Ethiopia also received military assistance from Russia and diplomatic support from France, which sought to curb Italian colonial expansion. Full-scale conflict began in 1895, with Italian forces under General Orest Baratieri initially advancing from Eritrea. However, Ethiopian counterattacks, including the siege of the Italian fort at Mekelle, forced its surrender. In April 1895, Crispi ordered partial troop withdrawals to reduce costs, proposing that additional funds could be raised by taxing Ethiopians, a strategy that ignored the region's limited resources and placed considerable strain on Italian forces. Crispi also sought to manipulate public perception, secretly funding journalists to produce pro-war coverage while censoring critical reports, including fines and confiscation of newspapers deemed unpatriotic. By early 1896, Crispi's pressure on Baratieri intensified. On February 25th, he sent a telegram implicitly accusing the general of cowardice and demanding decisive action to preserve the army's honor and the monarchy's prestige. Despite doubts among his officers, Baratieri launched an attack on March 1st at Adwa, facing a numerically superior Ethiopian force. The resulting Battle of Adwa was a catastrophic defeat for Italy, forcing a retreat into Eritrea. While Baratieri blamed his troops for the failure, British observers noted that the Italian soldiers had performed competently, and the collapse was largely attributed to inadequate leadership. The Battle of Adwa marked one of the deadliest European military defeats of the 19th century, surpassing the casualties of Waterloo and Eylau, with Italian losses exceeding those of all Risorgimento conflicts combined. Following the defeat, Crispi initially insisted on continuing the campaign, regarding peace negotiations as dishonorable and dismissing the plight of thousands of Italian prisoners. The public, however, reacted with outrage, resulting in riots in multiple cities and widespread criticism of both Crispi and King Umberto I, whose support for the war had been unwavering. The political fallout was swift. Within 2 weeks, Crispi's government collapsed under the weight of national disillusionment with Italy's foreign adventures, ending his tenure as prime minister. Downfall and death. The subsequent cabinet of Antonio Di Rudini became a platform for Felice Cavallotti's campaign against Crispi, and by the end of 1897, judicial authorities sought parliamentary permission to prosecute him for embezzlement. A parliamentary commission of inquiry determined that Crispi, upon assuming office in 1893, had found the Secret Service coffers empty and had temporarily borrowed funds from a state bank to maintain operations, repaying them through standard treasury allocations. While the commission noted procedural irregularities, it recommended only a vote of censure, and the Chamber of Deputies declined to authorize formal prosecution. Crispi resigned his parliamentary seat, but was overwhelmingly re-elected in April 1898 by his Palermo constituents. In subsequent years, his political activity was limited due to declining eyesight, though a successful cataract operation in June 1900 partially restored his vision, enabling him to resume some involvement in politics despite his advanced age. Crispi's health, however, continued to deteriorate, and he passed away in Naples on August 11, 1901. Witnesses reported that his last words reflected his enduring patriotism. Before closing my eyes to life, I would have a supreme comfort of knowing that our homeland is beloved and defended by all its sons. Legacy. Francesco Crispi remains a complex and polarizing figure in Italian and European history. He was a man of immense energy and vision, characterized by a fiery temperament and unyielding determination. His public and private life was marked by turbulence, personal enmities, and political battles. Some historians attribute his intensity and at times ruthless approach to his Albanian heritage, reflecting a blend of pride, resilience, and unflinching resolve. Initially a revolutionary and democratic figure, Crispi evolved into an authoritarian statesman during his premiership, often challenging Italian liberal institutions while pursuing ambitious domestic reforms and assertive foreign policies. He was internationally recognized alongside leaders such as Bismarck, Gladstone, and Salisbury. Giuseppe Verdi lauded him as the great patriot, and contemporaries recognized him as more scrupulous than Cavour, a more effective strategist than Mazzini, and a more astute political operator than Garibaldi. Crispi's legacy was later co-opted and distorted by fascist Italy, which celebrated his imperial ambitions while obscuring the complexities of his democratic and reformist achievements. Historians such as R.J.B. Bosworth note that Crispi pursued aggressively expansionist policies, significantly increasing military expenditure and risking conflict in Europe, while his colonial ambitions in East Africa culminated in the disastrous Battle of Adwa. Personal scandals, including questions regarding his private life and financial dealings, further complicated his historical reputation, leading to a retirement marked by both controversy and honor. Authored works. Crispi per un antico parlamentare, 1890. Repubblica e Monarchia, 1865. Ricorso del Collegio di Maria di Mezzogiusso in Provincia di Palermo, 1862. Cronistoria Frumenti, 1890. Francesco Crispi's life reflects the enduring spirit of the Albanian diaspora, a testament to resilience, vision, and determination in shaping history. Albanians have given the world leaders, thinkers, and patriots who have profoundly influenced nations beyond their homeland. Yet the global stage has too often failed to recognize or reciprocate these contributions. Crispi's story is a reminder that the legacy of a people cannot be measured solely by recognition received, but by the enduring impact of their courage and commitment to progress.